Hey, hey. I mean, it's kind of nice to have a break, but it's also maybe gotta look and see who maybe has a 40-minute, who has the paid account so they get unlimited. Because I hate stopping someone's like flow. Like it seemed like a good point to stop you at, but I hate stopping speakers when they're in the middle of speaking. Right, I can't hear you. I can't hear you. Hello. I can't hear you.
I'm saying it's all good. The historical background is always crucial to understand what's going on today.
Do you want to do a quick recap of what you just said? Also,
I'm just saying that the historical background.
Oh no. No. When we start again, do you want to just quickly recap where you just did in the first? Okay. Okay, we're waiting for Panina, Alana, Yuri.
No problem.
So just a thought, we could move to Google Meets, even though Google Meets sometimes sucks, but there's no cap on the duration of the session.
I know. I like the way that. No. I appreciate it because I wish there was.
Because I think it breaks the flow for the speaker.
No, I've. If you only joined faster, you would have heard me say the same thing.
I was busy posting.
You know what's the thing? No, thank you so much. You rock.
That's okay.
You know, it's like, on one hand, it's both. It's like, sometimes it's good to have a break, and then people also can leave and not come back if they really can't stay longer. Maybe they don't want to feel bad and like leave. So we're like, oh, you don't have to join again. I don't know. I feel like they're both work. I think we just have to figure out better with the speaker when they can break, because the truth is that usually it's like a 35 minute cheer and breaks versus Hillel was speaking for like 5 seconds. So it still seemed like a good time to stop him. But I think the question is more, I don't know, there are benefits to having it this way.
No worries.
No. Leora, I'm on your, totally agree with you. Yeah, Google Hangouts or Google Meet, which I used for the first time yesterday for a call. Yeah, no, Zoom's also good because it's recording everything.
No, Zoom's better because it's just better quality. Zoom is better quality, but Google Meets, it's cheap and free.
Yeah. I wish I had the quad processor on my computer so I could have a real virtual background versus white person, very white.
Loving all the Israeli flags.
Yeah, I apologize, everyone. The historical background is crucial to literally understand Judaism today, how it developed.
It's awesome. Thank you. That's so
I'm Matt and Hillel.
What?
It's also in San Fran. Oh my God, you guys should meet at the bridge.
Shut up.
I'm a floating head in the ocean. Wait, hold on. This is hilarious. Sorry, Hillel, continue.
Oh my God,
I'm focusing. I'm focusing.
Why does Leora's bridge look nicer? Yours is like smoking up.
I'm on my phone. Maybe that's why.
No, it just looks like it's like daytime for Hillel and it's nighttime for Leora, but you're in the same city, so I don't understand.
Because it's
a bit awkward.
I'll get rid of it. I don't want to upstage the speaker. I'm out.
His head was just floating in the Israeli flag for like 45 minutes.
Oh my God, it's amazing, right?
So funny.
We're missing Uri and Alana. Where are they? That's also why I think people also it's a hard call what to do if we should try to get
should we continue? Maybe they needed to go, or
yeah. That's why totally, yeah. We can go. You're good.
Okay. So just in a nutshell, so we're now we highlighted a little bit about the schism, the major disagreement between the two communities, and high tensions started rising, like real high tensions. And everyone wanted to stop to justify themselves theologically. For instance, Rav Yehuda said, not Rebbe Yehuda Hanasi, but Rav Yehuda from the Babylonian Talmud says, and this is a lot in Masechet Ketubot, Daf Kuf Yud Aleph. If you check that daf out, specifically that one, but it goes on a span of a few, you'll actually be able, unbelievably, to highlight different quotes that completely contradict each other, and you really see the such a vivid disagreement between the two communities. Rav Yehuda says, for instance, "Kol ha'oleh me'eretz Yisrael, miBavel eretz Yisrael over be'aseh." Whoever moves from Bavel to the land of Israel is violating a mitzvah taseh from the Torah. Other rabbis say, if you are buried in Israel, it's like you're buried under an altar. They say you must never leave land of Israel, and a lot of quotes. There's actually a very interesting same story, but two different ways to tell the story between the Yerushalmi Talmud and the Babylonian Talmud. The story goes about this brother. His brother passed away, and he now wants to go outside of the land of Israel to Babylonia of today, and he needs to marry his brother's his brother's wife, Yibum. It's a mitzvah from the Torah, and we know. I mean, we weren't there, so we don't know for sure, but we know based on the stories that the rabbi told him, "Don't go." But listen to this: in the Yerushalmi Talmud, the Talmud that was written in the land of Israel, it says the rabbi says to him, "Your brother left the land of Israel, and you want to replicate what he did? Baruch hamakom shenagafo. Thank God that he killed him." Such a harsh statement of justifying why God killed him. And again, put yourself in the shoes. Land of Israel was really people that lived there, rabbis, scholars, leaders, really were afraid of Jewish people forgetting the centrality of Israel. Listen to this. In the Babylonian Talmud, we have the exact same story, same rabbi. But what does the rabbi there say to him? He doesn't say that your brother left the land of Israel. Thank God that he killed your brother. He gives a different reason. He says, your brother went and married a non-Jew. Thank God that he killed him. Do you see how the narrative, the exact same story, the exact same characters have a completely different punchline? One says, don't marry out, meaning it's not because of Israel. In other words, we don't want to highlight necessarily the importance of the land of Israel. We're going to highlight, if you want, the importance of the Torah or not marrying out. The other one wants to highlight the importance of the land of Israel. Now, it's not a cynical argument or discourse between two rabbis or two stories. And thank God in the world that we live today, it doesn't necessarily contradict. But in that age where you, in a way, had to pick, it really did contradict, which leads me to the famous Gimel HaShavuot, the major theological basis that the Rabbi of Satmar, the Rebbe of Satmar, Rav Yoel Teitelbaum, in his book that he wrote in 1961, is what he lays the foundation of, if you want, anti-Zionism. His grandfather before also did it, but he outlines it very clearly. And he alludes to, first, he if you want the background, or not the background, but the original verse from the Torah, in which he bases the beginning of the story, is one verse from the second chapter in the book of Shemot, verse 21. It says there, Vayoel Moshe lashevet et ha'ish vayiten et tzipora bito leMoshe. Now, basically, the translation is, basically what happened there is that it says that Moses um, agreed to sit with that man, referring to his father-in-law, and Yitro, and Yitro gave him his daughter to marry. In the translation specifically, it says this is when you translate, you already pick an interpretation, because this is already a bit interpretive. But one of the translations here, for what it says there, and Moses agreed to stay in alien and foreign land. And he, Rabbi Teitelbaum, he concludes that the Jewish people should stay in exile. Now, the reason why, and again, I am biased, but the reason why you could think theologically, and a lot of rabbis say this, is this is if you want an agada, it's a story that we're not sure of its interpretation. It also is interesting, that it doesn't necessarily says here that he stayed in an alien land. It says that Moses agreed to stay with him. An alien land, a foreign land, is already a bit of an interpretation. Another thing is, like, it specifically says he agreed to stay with him, versus what? Going back to Egypt? Is Egypt not an alien land? It's not like it's a land of Israel. So there are flaws. The reason also why the Rebbe Satmar specifically picks this verse, other than one of the interpretations that I just outlined, is because Vayoel is the only word in the Torah that has the word Vayoel, Yoel, which basically means that Moses agreed. His name was Yoel, and interestingly enough, Vayoel Moshe, Yoel was his name, Moshe was his grandfather's name. So, so that's like another thing that connects to their family, and their history, or their narrative, if you want, of anti-Zionism. So they first take this as a basis, just as a preliminary story. The date's already back to the times of Moses. But then it gets more interesting, and this is the main basis until today. It's the famous Gimel HaShavuot, the 3 oaths. It is based on the scroll of Song of Songs that Shlomo HaMelech wrote, where the verse says as follows. And again, the verse that I'm going to read in the translation is already a bit of an interpretation, because there are many other interpretations. But just to get to it, I'm going to just jump and get into, if you want that type of translation. The verse says, and it repeats itself pretty much 3 times in Song of Songs, and it goes like this: השבעתי אתכם בנות ירושלים בצבאות ובאיילות השדה, אם תאירו ואם תעוררו את האבד שתחפץ. Basically, God says, or if you want, Shlomo, or the man says to the daughters of Jerusalem, I made you swear not to arouse the love, or not to bestir the love. One of the interpretations is because we know Shir Shirim is all allegorical and metaphorical, so it basically means to wait for him before arousing his love. And the interpretation, the Talmud comes and says, Rabbi Zira comes and says in the Talmud, what does this mean until the love is ready? He says these are 3 oaths that God had, 2 oaths were, the 3 oaths that God gave, 2 to Jews and 1 to the nations of the world. The first oath is not to ascend to the land of Israel like a wall, which means you can't ascend to Israel either by force, or another interpretation is with big groups, because no one, by the way, disagrees except Rav Yehuda, who was Rabbi Zira's rabbi, no one disagrees, and this is throughout the last 2,000 years. No one disagrees that individuals can come to Israel, but it's only to study Torah and to be buried. And that's also why you have different Hasidic movements, just like Satmar, who actually lived in Israel way before, already in the 19th century, and way before that, but specifically Masharim, because it was built in 1870 and until today, obviously. So again, so the meaning of the first oath is not to come in force or not to come in big groups making aliyah. The second one is not to rebel against the nations of the world. And the third one, that God, meaning not to rebel against the nations of the world, is in general not to rebel against them, and definitely not to rebel against them, which is the main point here, is if they don't want you to go to the land of Israel, you can't go. So meaning, if in theory they gave you the permission, maybe you can. And the third one, to the nations of the world, pretty much not for the nations not to subjugate and enslave and persecute the Jewish people too much. It says there, yoter midai, right? In the exile. Whatever that means is obviously a bit problematic, but that at least is what comes forward. And the Satmar Rebbe comes based on this, and he derives halacha and says this is the legal premises for why it is complete heresy to seize the land of Israel, to fight for it, to participate in the state of Israel. We should oppose it. In fact, he claims that that basically even the Holocaust was as a punishment on Zionism. He argues that Zionist forefathers, if you want, like Herzl, were complete heretics. He blames the bloodshed in the Middle East on Zionists. He says he goes out against most Hasidic streams, just like Gur. By the way, the current or the Minister of Health in Israel, until I think a few days ago, was a Gur Chassid, because they participate in the state of Israel in the elections, for instance. So he goes against Vishnitz and Gur, and pretty much most of the Hasidim. He calls them foolish, and that they abandoned the idea of the Baal Shem Tov of Hasidus because they participate in this big sin, and they completely are, in a way, they're completely out of line, and that's pretty much it. From, in a nutshell, from what his claims are, how he backs them up theologically, and he completely basically says in a punchline, it's Chilul Hashem, it's a desecration of God's name. We need to wait until the Messiah comes, and it's completely forbidden. And in fact, because of what is happening, that actually pushes the Messiah away. So now that we dealt with that, we could start dealing with plenty of, if you want, answers of how to combat it and what pretty much happened there. First of all, just for the record, the majority of rabbis throughout history, also in late antiquity, in the time where we have this discourse of rabbis over the Talmud, and throughout the Middle Ages, excluding like one rabbi and another rabbi who you could interpret it that way, what he says, the Maharal, but it's more complicated than that. Rabbis throughout the generations, vast majority, didn't agree completely with the conclusion of the Satmar Rebbe for various reasons. Let's start first of all with the idea that, or very important point, that this whole story of 3 oaths that God gave is a Agada, meaning it's a story, and stories sometimes there are a lot of conflicting stories that come in order to perhaps give a certain lesson. We don't exactly know, and there's a famous halachic rule that you could never derive a halacha, meaning a binding law that binds us, from a midrash, because then you may be in trouble. There are plenty of things that are written in midrashes that could literally, in some cases, could sound to you like we're creating a new religion. And the interesting thing is an example that I'm going to give that some of you might have heard in the past. There's a midrash that says that a Jew always needs 2 signs to show that they're Jewish. I'm now talking about men. And the 2 signs are, when they wear the tefillin, we know that it says le'ot al yedechem, right? So we know that's a sign. Ot is a sign. And what's the second sign? Circumcision. Those 2 things show that we are Jewish. So we don't wear, based on this midrash, or concept, we don't wear tefillin on Shabbos. Why? Because Shabbos is also le'ot beinu v'nechem, right? God says that's a sign between you and I that you're the chosen people and that I gave you the Torah. And because it's a sign, then we already have the circumcision, and now we have Shabbat. We don't need a third one, tefillin. So now comes the question, this is quite a smart question. So what happens if someone who halachically is Jewish, because his mother is Jewish, but he never got a circumcision, and he's keeping Shabbos, he only has one sign that he's Jewish. So perhaps he needs to put tefillin on Shabbos to remind him to have the 2 signs. He's not circumcised, so even on Shabbos, he needs to put tefillin on. But halacha was definitely paskin that is wrong. Although the concept is very nice and kind of cool, of having 2 signs at all times that prove and show that we're Jewish and show the covenant between us and Hashem, but it's not enough to derive such a far-fetched halacha that now whoever isn't circumcised will put tefillin on Shabbos. So that's just one example out of many, which illustrates why we don't do that. Now, let's go into some of the idea of those oaths, and actually tackle them for what they mean, meaning not just the basis from why you don't derive halacha from an agada, but actually, let's dig into it. So, if you remember, yeah.
Sorry. Oh,
No,
sorry to interrupt you. I feel horrible.
Better.
What
No,
you're
it's
saying,
better to ask questions.
No, I have a question, because what you're saying is really making me think about, like, what about those Chabad people who stand outside and offer for people to wear tefillin? And how do you know if they're not circumcised? Or am I like jumping the gun on this? I'm just confused. Like, is that an issue if like someone walks up to them and says, I'm Jewish, but if they're not circumcised, they technically shouldn't be putting tefillin on that day?
No. First of all, they definitely should be, because if you're Jewish and you're halachically Jewish, you should be putting on tefillin. It would have been a problem with Chabad doing that if they were doing that on Shabbos.
Oh, okay. It's only an issue on Shabbos. Okay, sorry.
Right, exactly. So
Gotcha.
so tefillin is always good, just not on Shabbos. So if someone isn't circumcised, you could say, look, I only have one sign because I'm keeping Shabbos. I'm not circumcised, so I should wear tefillin on Shabbos as well.
Gotcha.
Anyway, perhaps he didn't want to get his, thing 10% off. Anyway, so now actually addressing the actual oaths and theological reasons that were laid out throughout pretty much the last 2,000 years through various rabbis. And for instance, one thing that is fairly recent from the 20th century is that we said that one of the oaths is that you can't rebel against the nations of the world. What does that mean? You could only go and establish yourself in the land of Israel if they have given you permission, right? If they didn't, you can't. One of the main events that show that we did have permission was obviously the Balfour Declaration in 1917, who specifically says, as the new ruler of, or going to be the new ruler of the land of Israel, the British Empire at the time, who says, we see the government in Britain sees favorably the establishment of the state of Israel for the Jewish people. That was one thing. And the main thing, more than the Balfour Declaration even, is the 29th of November, 1947, where the UN, with a nice majority, declared and agreed to grant the Jews a Jewish state. So basically, that specifically shows that because we got the permission, so to speak, from the nations of the world, the oaths don't hold any relevance anymore. Continuing on, there's some that also say that the oaths are only good for 1,000 years, so it expired. There are interesting the Ramban, who specifically paskins that not only that it doesn't apply, but that the mitzvah of making aliyah is a mitzvah from Deoraita, meaning it's a mitzvah from the Torah. By the way, you should just know this, and maybe as a fun fact, a lot of rabbis in the Middle Ages, and I think even the Rambam, I'm not sure off the top of my head if he actually says it's one of the 613 mitzvot, but the Ramban is one of the rabbis who's most vocal on saying, no, it's an actual mitzvah out of the 613. So you really have to do it. And we know that the Ramban himself did do it. Another thing is that actually Rab Zira, who gave the oaths in the Talmud, actually himself, he made aliyah in the end. There's another reasoning that a gradual aliyah, the way it was, if you want, from the 19th century, the establishment of the modern Zionist movement, leaving the 1800 years before that on the side, was in gradually. It wasn't in such huge groups that basically consist of the entire nation of Israel. Another reason is that you can't, and this is an interesting one, and this obviously pertains not to our days, but it pertains to the time of the Talmud, because now it's not such a good idea to be in Iraq, Babylonia, back in the day, that you're not allowed to make aliyah from Babylonia to Israel, because you're basically going to compromise your Torah life because of the persecutions that we spoke about before, but you're allowed to make aliyah from other countries. Another big one, and I would say this is a huge reason, if you want, why these oaths are not relevant, is because the pact, the deal between us and the nations of the world was it disintegrated. It's basically the nations of the world violated their oath of subjugating us and persecuting us too much, so to speak. It's an understatement, but I'm just saying too much because that's literally the way it's presented in the Talmud. Needed to say the Holocaust, need to even the riots of 1648, 1492, plenty, 1099, the Crusades, 1097, sorry, and then 1099. But in any case, there are unfortunately, plenty of historical examples why they violated their oath, and therefore we are not obligated anymore to that oath as well. Another thing is that the idea of arousing of the people of Israel, Jewish people arousing to want to go and make Aliyah, and the is considered a pkida, meaning God pakadotanu. God, if you want, answered our prayers. God gave us now an opportunity to make Aliyah. So just based on that, just based on the will of people to make vast Aliyah and get a hold of the land of Israel, is considered already why the oath of not coming up and having the nations of the world, so to speak, needing to agree, that's in itself an agreement from Hashem. Also, some even Kabbalists come and go a step forward and say the signs of future redemption come and show it as well as is God answering our prayers. But some people say it's a gzera from Shemaim, the oath, meaning it's like a God's punishment, but it's not actually something that could prevent you from making Aliyah, meaning and getting an establishment of, if you want, the state of Israel, if you want, of the land of Israel, because it's God's punishment. But we don't also believe religiously that God punished us indefinitely. Another reason is also because Hagra actually says this in the end of the 18th century. He says that the oath was only to not build the third temple, which basically we still mean. He just connects it to the oath, and he says that's actually the oath and what we're not allowed to do. Another thing also with Hagra, and if you want, the rabbis like Rabbi Elkalai, Rab Hirsch, and many other ones, Rab Kook, and they write a lot about this in the 19th century, by the way, way before Herzl. Not Rabbi Kook, but the other two first rabbis I mentioned. They write a lot about it in the 19th century of how there are two messiahs. One is the Messiah, Mashiach ben Yosef, the Messiah that is the son of Yosef, a tzaddik, and the other one is Messiah ben David. Now, we always, when we sing and when we speak or mention full redemption, we obviously allude to Messiah ben David. But the concept is that from an historical point of view, what needs to precede Messiah ben David, the Mashiach ben David, needs to be the Messiah ben Yosef, meaning, and that's gathering back to the land of Israel, and that's something we need to do ourselves in order to bring redemption. So the Messiah ben Yosef is something that pretty much, according to them, has been done throughout the latter part of the 19th century and the 20th century, and that in a way paves the road for the Mashiach ultimately to come. Another few reasons that I want to address the Holocaust as well, I don't think anyone knows, and I think it's actually an insult, and I'm not here coming to, God forbid, disrespect any rabbi or any opinion. I think it's almost cheapening the Holocaust and morally even wrong to interpret why it happened. When you could bring many reasons, but I don't believe anyone saw God's booklet of why he does or doesn't do things in the world. But something important to remember about the Holocaust is that if the Satmar Rav thinks that the Holocaust was caused as a result of Zionism, then why, and basically the premises of what he's saying is that obviously God runs the world. So if God runs the world, why did he then give us 3 years later the state of Israel? So it just completely contradicts itself. And it's picking and choosing. His complete expulsion of even Hasidic streams that don't really approve of modern state of Israel because it's not run by halacha, for instance, and they would be considered anti-Zionists. They don't go to the army. He disapproves them even. I again, personally, and also based on, I think, many Jewish stories that are given by rabbis, we have to, I think, be very cautious, to say the least, with someone who rules out vast amount of the Jewish people, or I should say 98% of the Jewish people. The claim of Herzl as a heretic, I actually gave a sermon once about this in Sydney, Australia, when I was a shaliach, and it's quite interesting. There is a text, I actually didn't plan on speaking about this, but there's a text that was found from Herzl's diary. I think it was around the year, maybe 1891, maybe 1881. Anyway, he writes that from his point of view, I'm just going to strengthen what Rabbi Satmar says for a minute, and then I'm going to contradict it. So he writes that from his point of view, the solution for anti-Semitism in Europe needs to be complete assimilation, and more than that, the entire Jewish community in Vienna should walk on a Sunday into the main cathedral, having the bells rung in the background, and make a mass conversion to Christianity. In this way, by showing that we are going to be part and parcel of the general society, the non-Jewish society, we are going to solve the problem of anti-Semitism. They're going to start loving us because we're pretty much like them. Just a few years go by between Karl Lueger, 1894, and the famous Dreyfus trial. Karl Lueger was a raging anti-Semite mayor of Vienna. In the famous Dreyfus trial, there was Jewish general or high-ranking officer who was basically accused of treason in France. He saw just how anti-Semitism won't get solved on itself, and having an own state of Israel is crucial. So far, I actually back the Satmar Rebbe. The reason why I starkly think that Herzl was not such a heretic, not that I want to judge anyone, and why I think the Satmar Rebbe is specifically wrong is maybe using an example of our most anticipated, if you want, person and someone we look up to, is King David. King David was literally the black sheep of the family. When Shmuel comes and wants to anoint the next leader of the Jewish people instead of King Saul, he goes and he sees the 7 children of Ishai. And God says to each one of them, no, it's that I didn't choose any one of them. So he asks the father, do you have another child? Do you have another son? And he says, yeah, there's this one out in the field there, who's,